On today's Locked On Jayhawks, we discuss early previews of KU's games against Iowa State and BYU. We take a look at the big guys up front. Offensive line preview, who could be the starting five for KU?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. And thank you to the everydayers catching each and every show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast. You can also find us on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're taking an early look at some opponents for KU with the Iowa State game, which that should be a fun one. How is the crowd going to work out? Is that going to be like a bowl game in Arrowhead against the Cyclones? And then the game at BYU up in Provo, your first visit there since joining the Big 12 for them. And then we'll get to our offensive line preview and who's going to even start for KU on the offensive line, who's going to be in that rotation for the Jayhawks. This episode of the show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Now through September 22nd, so you got a little over a month, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. All right, let's start with the early preview of the KU Iowa State game. So this is a very big game because in the last 2 years, you have won close games both times over Iowa State, and they have been kind of the difference in you hitting that next level of a season, right? I mean, if it weren't for a bunch of missed kicks by Iowa State and some good defense by KU in that game in 2022, you don't make a bowl game. If it wasn't for in 2023, that great road effort that you put out there, you know, I don't know. It's 7-5. Does an 8-5 season sound as cool as 9-4? I don't know. It certainly doesn't. And are you preseason ranked this year? I don't know. Maybe not. Right. So Iowa State was 7-6 a season ago, and they had a very weird season. There was a moment early in the year where like there was some Matt Campbell. Is he on the hot seat conversations? They had lost to Ohio. And then they also lost to Iowa. Turns out Ohio was like a 10-win team in the MAC. Iowa, still had a good season, even though they couldn't play offense. But they were coming off a 4-8 season when those things happened. But then after 2-3 start, they won 3 straight. They won 5 of their last 7 games in the regular season, and they played the most freshmen of any Power 5 program in 2023. So certainly the arrow pointed up for Iowa State this year. I mean, we had Phil Steele on with us. Check that episode. And if you're an everydayer, you already caught it. From earlier a couple weeks ago, and he was very high on what Iowa State could possibly be this season. And so you look at Phil Steele, he rates them as the 4th best offensive line in the Big 12 here for the 2024 season. I'm not sure I buy that as much. Like you look at the Pro Football Focus grades, they weren't as great as that. They also finished 130th in the country in offensive line run push rate per Pick 6 previews. The one thing they did well, though, they didn't give up many sacks. I do think part of that you give credit to the offensive line. I think another part of it, though, you give to play calling. If you notice, they did a lot of a lot of quick throws. They did a lot of like play action rollouts to get Rocco back out of the pocket and then throw it on the run. So I think they were a better pass blocking unit than run blocking unit, but they were a bad run blocking unit. And I do think some of the sack numbers are a bit overrated. So I don't know that I'm saying they're the 4th best offensive line in the Big 12. Are they maybe middle of the pack? Yeah. Is that splitting hairs? Sure. Why not? But they do have 10 starters back overall on offense. They have 7 of those 10 who earned one of the 4 Phil Steele All Big 12 teams. Only one of those players, though, Jared Hufford, is on one of the top 2 teams on Pick 6 previews. So it is more, depth, I guess, than star power, truly. But still, this was one of the most improved offenses in Power 5. If you look at like some per play numbers, you return Rocco back after a solid freshman season, even though they finished 103rd in rushing offense per game. A big reason why was low, or a big reason why they finished so as high as they did in terms of the overall yards per game was they low-key finished 21st in passing yards per attempt. So I like their top couple receivers. I like their tight end. They typically are one of those programs that has a good tight end year in and year out. And I think it'll be interesting that they had a new offensive coordinator last year that helped turn it around, but he has since gotten a job in the NFL. So how much does that affect things? Could it have a big negative impact on what Iowa State is this year? I don't know. It's also interesting that there was some talk that like Rocco Becht was maybe just a bridge guy to they had another quarterback coming in with maybe higher potential who Becht was a redshirt freshman. This other guy was a true freshman because if you remember, Hunter Deckers was involved in the gambling thing and couldn't play. And that this other guy was more talented and would eventually beat him out. But Rocco Becht was pretty good as a young freshman. So people starting to get those Brock Purdy type of comparisons out as fast as possible. Defensively, though, this is one of those units where just seemingly every year under Matt Campbell, it's just you expect Iowa State to have one of the best defenses, not just in the conference, but in the country. Phil Steele gives them a top 3 mark for Big 12 teams in defensive line, linebacker, and DB. So basically just loaded throughout. They have 9 starters returning. They have 6 of those 9 on Phil Steele, all Big 12 first, second, third, or fourth teams. Again, Pick 6 previews a bit lower there, but still good. They Pick 6 previews gives them the number 2 D line, the number 1 defensive backs, and then a little lower on the linebackers at number 8. They have just 2 players on the top 2 all-league teams. But either way, this is seen as being a very solid team this upcoming year. And unlike the offense, which is breaking in a new offensive coordinator after a good year, John Heacock is the defensive coordinator who is back and has been really the mastermind behind this great defense that Iowa State has played. Like, they finished top 25 defensively on opponent-adjusted metrics in the country 4 straight seasons in a row at Iowa State. Like, that doesn't happen very often. So, honestly, I'm very surprised that John Heacock does not have a head coaching job right now based on how he's done it. But, some guys, they just want to be coordinators. I don't know if that's the case or if he's just been overlooked for whatever reason. But he's an awesome defense coordinator, and that will get that unit kind of in the right place. So what's going to be the key for KU? Can you find a way to run it on them? They play this like 3-3 defense where it looks like you should be able to run the ball, but you just can't. They swarm to the football. They have so much speed to the football, even though the defensive linemen typically aren't. I mean, we've seen some of those guys. I'm trying to remember the name of the DN they just had drafted by the Jets in the first round in 2023, Will McDonald. They'll have the occasional like stud there, but for the most part, their defensive linemen, it feels like they're just more space eaters trying to take a block so that all those speedy guys can come up and make the tackles. But it's been super effective. And KU last season only averaged, under 4 yards per carry. And as a team, Iowa State gave up just 3.8 yards per carry overall last season. So like they find a way to stop the run. Can Kansas actually run the football against this defense and figure that out this upcoming season? Maybe it just takes having Jeff Grimes. Maybe he has a better understanding of it and will give him a new perspective. I don't know. Big play passing will be a big one here because of the fact that Iowa State is such a stern defense. If you can hit a few big plays, it can really open things up or carry that specific day because you're going to have to win a couple. We saw it last year, the game at Iowa State, like KU had a couple plays, whether it was like the Doug Emelian one or there was a Quentin Skinner one, there was an LJ Arnold one where they hit some big plays where it took like the receiver maybe making a really good play because Iowa State has good DBs. They're going to put you on some islands. Does help the TJ Tampa. Their stud corner's gone, though. Jeremiah Cooper and Miles Purchase are still studs back on the roster, but you're going to have to just make some plays on the outside to beat this defense because schematically, like it's so tough. And they were top 40 against the run last year. They're 23rd in yards allowed per attempt, but they did rank outside the top 50 in explosive pass rate defense. And again, we saw that a little bit last season for KU. So can you hit them with some big passes to kind of open things up because it's really tough to kind of just slowly move down the field on this defense. And then the last one here, what's going to be the key? KU fans got to show up and show out. And not just the fans who have the season tickets and are going to each and every game. This has to be one where KU fans have to really take pride in it because all of a sudden, if it's one thing if you're filling out, it's going to be hard to fill out the full 70,000+ people that are at Arrowhead, right? If they do it, it'll be awesome, and I hope it does happen. But let's say you have a game where, like against TCU, if KU brings 50,000 fans to the KU TCU game at Arrowhead, how many TCU fans are going to be there? 5,000? I don't know. Like at most 10,000, right? If you only bring 40, 50,000 to the KU Iowa State game, the rest of that stadium is probably going to be filled with Iowa State fans. So like your home field advantage mitigates a little bit, right? So you really got to show up in this game and make that a home field advantage in what could be a coin flip type game. Now, what will be the expected result? KU is about a 7-point favorite or so per ESPN FPI. Not sure, again, how much the home field matters on this one because of those different things. So again, numbers will change based on how the teams are doing up to that point. But right around a touchdown is kind of where you're at, which I actually expected it to be a little bit lower after hearing some of the hype on Iowa State, but I don't know, maybe FPI isn't quite as high there. All right, we'll get to our preview of the at BYU game and then our offensive line room preview and who's the favorites to be the starting 5 for KU on Locked On Jayhawks. First, this episode is brought to you by Ibata. It's summertime, which means it's barbecue season, baby. Stock up on all your grilling favorites and earn cash back on every purchase when you use Ibata. So you won't have to choose between burgers or hot dogs. Get both. Right? Is that radio? Like, which pie do you want? It's like both. Yes, that's what you want. Ibata is a free app that lets you earn cash back every time you shop. Earn on hundreds of items from groceries to beauty supplies, even toys. So you can make sure you're beating inflation no matter what you're purchasing. It's time you joined over 50 million users who use Ibata to earn cash back every time they shop. Right now, Ibata is offering our listeners $5 for just trying Ibata. Just use the code Locked On College Football when you enter in, or Locked On College when you enter. Okay, that's Locked On College when you register. Just go to the App Store, Google Play Store, download the free Ibata app to start earning cash back, and use code Locked On College. That is Ibata, IBOTTA, in the Google Play or App Store, and use code Locked On College. All right, continuing on, and thank you to everydayers tuning into each and every episode. We get to our KU BYU early preview, and if you just want to learn more about BYU, Jake Hatch does an awesome job for the BYU's Locked On show. You can find that, or Locked On Big 12 show, or just a different sport if you're interested in catching up with an NBA team or something like that, across our Locked On podcast network, and make the Locked On College Football show our second listen every day after, of course, this is your first listen every day. All right, KU BYU. So this is a game we saw last year in Lawrence. Now KU is returning the trip to Provo. BYU went 5-7 last season. That was their first year joining the Big 12. And this is something I looked at before last season. It was, how did teams do? Like the ones that back when the Pac-10 expanded to the Pac-12, you added like Utah, for instance. You added some Mountain West schools. How did teams do in joining some of these other Power 5 conferences, not just the Pac-12, in their first year from coming up? And a lot of them struggled, but by year 2, they might have seen a 1 or 2 win increase. So I almost expect BYU to be a little bit better, though they did lose some of their better players. So maybe this isn't the one that takes that jump. Like maybe it's UCF or something like that takes that jump in year 2 after joining the Big 12. But anyway, 8 starters do return for the offense. It's the quarterback that there's a lot of question marks in. They graduated their quarterback last year who, kind of some ups and downs all season long at that position. They did add a former Big 12 champion in Jeff Grimes' former quarterback, Jerry Bohannon from BYU. He was at USF before this, though. They're returning their backup, Jake Retzlaff, who he might win the job. He was 0-4, though, as a starter with a 50% completion rate. So I don't know if that's good if he wins the starting battle. But even though it's a lot back, it's not back from a ton of success. Like they finished 87th in points per play. They finished 11th in the Big 12 in yards per carry at just 3.5. They finished, 111th in the country, 123rd in offensive line rush push, 117th in yards per pass attempt, 112th in quarterback rating. The only thing they did well last year was pass block. And you know why? Because they had a left tackle who got drafted in the early second round and is now starting with the Kansas City Chiefs as a rookie. He's gone. So they do have a solid group of receivers. They got the Lassiter kid back. He's one of 2 really good receivers that they have. Isaac Rex, though, who is great in Lawrence, he's gone. So that's good news for the KU defense. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of questions for this BYU offense. How much are they going to be able to run the football? How good is the quarterback going to be? And those are 2 kind of scary things coming into a season. 6 starters back on the defensive side of the ball. The front 7 is probably the best part of their team with what's back, including a all Big 12 defensive end and Tyler Batty. They also have a stud linebacker and Ben Bywater, who had to go through some injuries last year, but a really good player. Even then, though, they finished 113th in yards allowed per carry last year. They finished 88th in points allowed per play overall. They did end up closer to nationally average in like pass defense, but they also lose a ton at the corner position. So a lot of questions here with BYU. Typically, I've trusted this program. They've been so good for so long, but obviously it is a different animal being in the Big 12, but it's a tough place to play too. So what's going to be the key for KU? Well, I think dealing with the altitude, dealing with the time change, and specifically dealing with those things better than last year in Reno. And maybe the expectations too, right? If I want to throw that in there, adjusting to possible expectations. We're getting to the final games of the season here as part of this. This would be your, I guess, third to last game. There are only 2 more games after this one. And so if Kansas is having the type of season that everybody's hoping them to have, right, maybe you're coming into this game at 7-2 or 8-1, or dare say even 9-0 coming into this game. A lot of expectations that would come with that, right? And if BYU is not living up to, I don't know, their long storied football program, right? This is a very successfully or historically successful football program that they have. And they're coming into this game at 3-6. do you overlook this game? And we saw the game where KU went out to Nevada last year. It was a late night game. It was played in altitude in Reno. It was a late game just in general, but because of the time change, it made it probably feel even later for KU than Nevada. And those all things, I mean, we don't know the time of the game yet, but those all things are possible. At the very least, the altitude is, and the looking over the opponent could be for the BYU game and adjusting to those expectations in a place that, as much as Lance Leipold has turned around this program, it's another thing when you might have like a number 4 next to your name or something like that, right? There's an added level of pressure that kind of comes with that if we get to that point, and that's kind of the thing. Other than that, like the X's and O's, I think picking up blitzes. BYU actually blitzed a lot last year. Their new defensive coordinator a season ago likes to blitz. He's back this year, so they should be blitzing a lot. But they didn't hit home as much of the blitzes as they wanted. They were only 129th in negative play percentage last year. So that's kind of a problem when it's like, I want to do this thing, but we're not good at it, But point being, if Kansas can pick up the blitz, like a lot of teams did on BYU a season ago, you're scot-free because you're going to end up with a lot of favorable matchups or should be able to kind of break the back end of the defense. What would be the expected result? About a 13-point favorite right now per ESPN FPI on a neutral field. So I'd assume playing in Provo, probably like 9.5-point spread if it came out right now. Again, disclaimer though, that could very much change based on both teams' results to that point in the season. All right, let's finish up offensive line room preview. What are the big guys going to be starting like for KU this year? This episode of Locked On Jayhawks is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now, through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5, that's it, and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. You know you're going to want that because the Chiefs are playing opening Thursday night, right? What does that mean? They're not playing on Sunday. What does that mean? There's a lot of games for you to watch that are not the Chiefs game. And so you can use that for Red Zone. You can use it to watch whatever game you want. You can mix and match, and you can pull up. The best thing about the YouTube TV is that you can kind of pick your own 4 quad box of like the 4 games you want to watch. So with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out of market game. And all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So get that 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV by, again, placing a $5 bet on FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you again to our everydayers joining us for each and every show. More opponent previews coming up through the week, more position previews coming up through the week. We're going to be a week away as of Thursday, so we're going to talk more about the KU Lindenwood game later this week. We have plenty coming at you as we are right around the corner from KU football season. I mean, it's week 0 of college football actually right now, so we actually do have real college football upcoming this weekend, which is exciting. Okay, KU's offensive line, I think has become more interesting over the course of fall camp. It feels like there's been less settled than maybe we would have thought. Here's the players as part of the offensive line room for KU. Bryce Cabeldue, he is a senior. He's been a multi-year starter for you and just been kind of a rock and has gotten a little bit better every year. I think he had his best season for sure last year. Mostly played right tackle, but sounds like he might move to left tackle this year. It's entirely possible. Logan Brown, redshirt junior. He was injured last season, but former 5-star recruit who's at Wisconsin, had some really good production in his last year at Wisconsin, came over to Kansas, was injured. A lot of ceiling, a lot of potential. What can he bring to the table? He was playing right tackle some recently. Originally thought of as being starting left tackle. We'll see. Shane Bumgardner, former D2, like offensive lineman of the year guy. He is a redshirt senior. Could he win the center award, the center job? Michael Ford is a true senior. He is a little banged up. It sounds like at some point during fall camp, but he's the projected starter at guard. He was one of the 5 highest rated guards by Pro Football Focus in the Big 12 a season ago. Darrell Simmons Jr., redshirt senior. He's a former Iowa State player. Sounds like he could be a rotational guy. Amir Herring, redshirt freshman, former 4-star recruit at Michigan. So a lot of potential there. We'll see if he can crack the 2 deep at some point this year. Nolan Gorchika, redshirt junior, could be a swing player, could play guard, could play tackle, kind of put them all over. And those are super important to have on your 2 deep. Bryce Foster, redshirt junior, competing with Shane Bumgardner for the starting center spot. Former Texas A&M Aggie, started 28 games with the Aggies. And then you have a bunch of freshmen in there. Carter Lavrusky is a freshman. Harrison Utley is a freshman. Kene Anene is a freshman. David Abajian is a freshman. Sounds like he's hurt right now. You got some of the redshirt freshmen. Calvin Clements, he'll be competing for the backup left tackle role, but should still have a high ceiling. James Livingston competing for a tackle role. Redshirt freshman there too. Maybe he can even play a little bit of guard. And then you have some other juniors in there, redshirt juniors. Kobe Baynes, redshirt junior, brings a lot of physicality on the interior at the guard position. I've really liked what he's looked like over the course of his progression after transferring in from Louisville. Dre Dorian is a redshirt junior, maybe competing as kind of a third-string center. And then DK Stearns is a redshirt junior. You've got a bunch of walk-ons here. Hank Kelly, I think he's a walk-on. He's a redshirt junior. Kyle Farks is a redshirt sophomore. Eli Richmond, freshman. And Miles Ewell is a freshman. So that was a lot of players. Deep breath there after all of that one. But I think the big question here is who's going to be the starters, because it seemed like coming into fall camp, it was almost like okay, it'll be Logan Brown at left tackle, it'll be Michael Ford at guard, it'll be Kobe Baynes at guard, it'll be Bryce Foster at center after bringing him in from Texas A&M, and then it'll be Bryce Cabeldue at right tackle. Sold, easy, done. But the center position has emerged into a real competition between Shane Bumgardner, who sounds like he's gotten a lot better. He's added some weight, knows the system a little bit better than Bryce Foster because he was here for spring ball. So it's Bryce Foster catching up on the mental side. It's Shane Bumgardner catching up on the physical side. It sounds like it's a wide open competition. Now, could some of that talk from the coaching staff when they're talking to the media and the press conferences and stuff and talking about some of these different starting battles and stuff like that, could a little bit of that be motivation to try to make sure Bryce Foster stays on top of it and they know it's going to go to Foster? It absolutely could, but for now, that is an open competition. I would still be leaning that Bryce Foster eventually wins that job there. Then you look at the tackles. How are those going to be organized for the offensive tackle as well? Because again, it seemed like Logan Brown at left tackle, and then at right tackle, you end up with Bryce Cabeldue. But recently, there were some reports out there that it was actually switched around, that it was Cabeldue at left tackle, which is interesting because you go back to 2023 during spring ball, they tried putting Cabeldue at left tackle a little bit because at that point, you didn't know who your left tackle was going to be. Eventually, Dominic Pooney slid out from guard and played tackle, but you didn't know who it was going to be. And I remember Bryce Cabeldue approached the staff. He said this to the media that he approached the staff about he just didn't feel comfortable there. So that's interesting that he would play left tackle now. Is that just them trying different things out? Is it seeing if he's more comfortable now? Is maybe just another year under belt? He is comfortable now, right? That kind of becomes interesting how those two go, but it still feels like those two would start. Maybe Gorchika kind of becomes the backup tackle for either, whichever one ends up being. And then when you look at the guard position, if Michael Ford's healthy, he's going to start. He's experienced. He is one of the best guards in the Big 12. Kobe Baynes, I think, brings a ton of physicality, but that two deep at the guard position is going to be very feisty to get into. Like I said, Gorchika could play some guard. He could play some tackle. Amir Herring, former 4-star at Michigan, could factor in there maybe later in the season when he has a better idea of, knowing the offense and everything. Darrell Simmons Jr. Is a former starter at Iowa State. If he's coming off the bench, that's a good place to be in if you're the KU offensive line, though there have been some of those recent comments from Jeff Grimes kind of tempered the expectations of the offensive line. So again, is that motivation? Is that truth? Kind of remains to be seen with all of those. And then the future starting spots up for grabs because you're going to be losing, some of the Cabeldue is going to be gone after the season. Bumgardner, Ford, Simmons are all going to be gone at the end of the season. There's going to be even more offensive line spots that are kind of up for grabs. So is this unit better, worse, or the same than it was last year? I think this actually has a higher ceiling than it did a season ago because if Bryce Foster and Logan Brown play up to their potential, it is a higher ceiling of where you were a season ago. I think Foster at his peak will give you more than what you had from Nowitzki last year. Nowitzki, great leader, got the offense organized and everything, but I think from a physical level, you get another element with Bryce Foster. Ford, you theoretically have the same guy back. The other guard position, I think Baynes will be better this year than he was a season ago. It's kind of a rotation with them and Armaj Reed-Adams. I think Cabeldue will be a little bit better than he was last year. Obviously, you get worse at the tackle spot by not having Pooney, and that's even if if Brown comes in and lives up to the potential of his 5-star rating, maybe it's not worse, right? But that's why I think the ceiling is actually better, but I think the floor is lower for this unit than it was a season ago. I think they had a very high floor from the unit a year ago. They were definitely a top half offensive line in the Big 12. Maybe they were top 5 in the Big 12. I think they're probably going to be around there this year, but like I said, higher ceiling, lower floor. So I guess you would say that means kind of around the same to where they were last season as a unit. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll see you next time with LOJ.